Good morning, everyone. Hello, hello. Good morning. Thank you guys for all coming out this morning. Taking time out your busy Saturday morning to come spend a couple hours here with us to talk about cannabis in Novato. So that's very exciting. So we're glad to have you all here. My name is Michael Antwine. I'm one of two assistant city managers for the City of Novato. I'm responsible for a variety of different things in the city, but one of them is overseeing the implementation and outreach efforts for the city's cannabis program. And with that, we're starting a 60-day, 2.5, 3-month outreach process to where we're going to the community to solicit their input and feedback as to how their feelings are about cannabis. Do they want cannabis in Novato? And if so, what type of activities do they want? Cannabis-related activities in the community, etc. So we're talking to community members, we're talking to cannabis industry individuals, we're talking to our local nonprofits, we're talking to the school district, other social organizations, faith-based organizations within the community to try to get your input as well, to help guide the development process and the framework for what cannabis will look like in Novato. As you guys all know, Prop 64 cannabis was approved. The voter percentage in Novato was almost 70%, so it was a high percentage of Novato residents that voted yes for recreational cannabis here in the state of California. Just a little bit of housekeeping items before we get going. I was told if I don't say these, I'll get in trouble, but I'm trying not to get in trouble. But this here, just a little flyer, talks about our community meetings. These aren't all the community meetings or activities that we're having, but these are the ones specifically designed for the community to get your input and feedback as we go through this outreach and planning process. We're also, as I mentioned, going to be meeting with various stakeholders. We met just yesterday with various cannabis industry individuals, so groups that are companies that are actually in cannabis, whether they are retailers or distributors, manufacturers, etc., to try to get an understanding of how do they view cannabis in Novato and what does the cannabis industry look like. We also have hired a well-known and renowned firm, HDL, and Matt Eden here, one of their partners, will be stepping up next and kind of going through the city's engagement and outreach process for you. So please make sure you have this, that your friends, family members, everybody know to please come out and get involved. Also, there's a little white card. It's a pretty cool little white card that was on the table there. This has our website, and it also has a little scan bar for you to simply just take out your cell phone and put a camera feature to it, and then it'll automatically pop up a little website that you click, and you can submit questions. So if you get a question today, or a question we don't get time to answer a question today, you can submit that question online, and we'll be taking that information, we'll be answering those questions, and then we'll be posting it. Bless you. We'll be posting that information on the city's website. And also we have a link for the city's website just so you can have up-to-date information about cannabis, talk about the existing policies, where we're at from an outreach process, and what are the next stages in that process. Before I go too much further, I'd like to make some brief introductions. So we do have a couple of elected officials in the audience this morning, and we're glad to have you here representing Novato, as well as some city staff. So I'd like to acknowledge Mayor Pro Tem Pam Drew, who's sitting right here in the second row. Thank you for coming out. We also have Councilwoman Pat Eklund in the back there. And we also have Councilwoman Denise Athis in the back. Also from our city staff, we have Community Development Director Bob Brown. And you submit all your complaints and questions to Bob Brown. We also have our Finance Manager, Tony Clark, in the back. Laura McDowell, one of our analysts in the City Manager's office. She's in the very back. She's hiding out, I don't know why. And then we also have Brian Lopez, another analyst, and he's in my office. So just a few housekeeping items there, and just a brief status of where we're at as relates to cannabis in Novato. Right now, the city currently has a moratorium that's in place. So last November, the council adopted a moratorium or ordinance that basically, put a freeze or prohibited any cannabis activities from occurring right now. That ordinance does allow what we call a little carve-out provision for delivery of medical marijuana, and then also as a carve-out for 2 existing businesses that were here that were doing testing activities. in Novato. But other than that, all other cannabis activities are basically on pause or hold until we complete this community engagement outreach process to figure out how the community wants the city to regulate cannabis. Our time frame is to try to complete this process by late September, go to the Planning Commission and work with Bob Brown's office to develop a regulatory framework, which is an ordinance. And then we'll present that to the City Council, hopefully late September, early October, so that we can get that in place before the ordinance expires in November. With that, I'll turn over the meeting now to Matt Eden from HDL, and he's going to go through cannabis. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming on a Saturday. We very much appreciate that. The city is really putting a lot of effort into starting these conversations off right, and that really involves you. And so thank you for coming on behalf of the city and behalf of me. I appreciate it. I don't like just talking to one person here. Very brief introduction. My name is Matthew Eaton. I'm with HDL. HDL is a 38-year sales tax, property tax, government consulting firm. We only contract with government agencies. And 2 years ago, we started answering questions on behalf of our clients about what are they supposed to do with the tax revenue. And we kind of evolved that into answering all of their other questions and creating a separate division that is solely designed to help local government reach out to communities and really start that process off. So my background, I was a cop for 30 years. The last 7 years, I started in Southern California. I moved to Colorado, and 7 years ago, I had the opportunity of working for the Department of Revenue, which was tasked with developing the Marijuana Enforcement Division. So at the very beginning, I was there watching the evolution of the conversations and the talks and the development of ordinances, and I was very fortunate in that I was responsible with just a handful of people developing the enforcement protocols, reaching out to the communities, local governments, and trying to get things moving when we were inventing a will. So that eventually brought me here to HDL and puts me in a position to be able to answer questions. The reason why I think it's so important to do what I do is at the very beginning when we were dealing with the various stakeholders in Colorado, I found it frustrating that the conversation was always dominated by one group. It wasn't necessarily the same group all the time, but there was always one group that dominated the conversation. And if only one group dominates the conversation and we don't get input from the various stakeholders, then this doesn't work. What ends up happening is policies are created that are maybe unenforceable or don't reflect the values of the community that they're in. If we create rules that are impossible for the industry to adhere to, it becomes problematic. So it became very apparent that in order to make this work, we had to reach out and have a conversation. And my goal is I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is I've seen the stumbling blocks and the problems and where the conversations go askew. And what I want to be able to do is to bring all the stakeholders together, and that's the goal of the city. So we can have a conversation and talk about the same thing instead of rumor or conjecture or hearsay. Let's talk about the same thing, and then that way when we ask questions and get answers to them, they're the most appropriate. Yes, sir.
Sorry, one last little housekeeping item. Just so everybody knows, we do have NCTV here, our local cable company, and so we will be recording this community workshop and having that available on the website. So just so you guys are aware of that, so if there are any, kind of answers about it being recorded, just so you know. But it's really more for the purpose of so individuals residents aren't able to make the meeting, they can still hear the presentation, hear some of the questions that were asked. And so we'll have that information also on our website as well. So just so you guys know. Thank you. Sorry.
And Michael?
Yes.
Are we going to be advertising this in the IJ for the next few meetings?
I just did a piece with the IJ last week after the council meeting, so I'm not sure of the timing of when they will be. I know they're making some advertisement, but I'll get back and let you know exactly when.
Thank you.
We have.
And we'll be sending out stuff as well to a lot of like our news feeds and alerts and everything as well.
Okay.
So especially if you registered at the front, front there, we'll go ahead and get you added to that list, and we'll send out all the notifications for any events. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Max. Sorry about that.
Sure. So all this slide is we want community involvement. So with that, it may be very boring to listen to me talk nonstop for 30-some minutes. So what I really encourage is if I've said something, or you got a question or a comment, please raise your hand. I want to address them as they come up. I really want to be interactive. Yes, ma'am.
Since you've had experience with this, could you give us an idea?
You guys speak up, please. Or
Sorry. Could you tell us what you see as the, you keep referring to the stakeholders? Could you give us an outline of what you mean by that?
Sure. So the question is, I mentioned stakeholders, and the question is, who are the stakeholders? And the stakeholders really are everyone: the city, council, staff, the community. Within the community, there are church groups and neighborhood organizations and school groups. All of these people come to the conversation with a different approach. The industry has their various groups, and they have people that are newly coming to the industry. They have people that have been around for 10, 20, 30 years.
You mean the marijuana industry?
The marijuana industry. So everyone comes to the table with this conversation in mind, and there are lots of subsets, but all the stakeholders, and you can really clump it into the industry, the community, and the government bodies to make sure that when we have conversation, government reach out to one side, they will reach out to the other side and make sure that all the comments are received. So when, again, the questions are asked, we can get accurate answers.
excuse me,
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't hear you mention patients. Do patients that use marijuana, are we in there somewhere?
Absolutely. And yes, I was remiss in, the question was, would patients be a stakeholder? And most certainly. And again, stakeholders are everyone. And I apologize for not acknowledging that, but it truly, every single person in our community and in our state comes to the table and has something to say about this. And the goal is to hear everyone. Everyone has something of value to give us.
And then we do have a microphone, so if there are questions, we'll have Eric, the young gentleman standing in the back. He'll walk over to you so that everybody in the room can hear you, to help project your voice. Thank you.
So I've started off with this, but the first part is through lots of trial and error in many different states, we've come up with kind of a pathway to success. And the first and foremost is education. And that's the purpose of today, is not only to educate, but that education and collaboration really should be done simultaneously. But the reason why education, we need to have a common conversation. We need to be able to speak the same language before we completely collaborate. So although they should be intertwined, education really needs to come first, in that we have a conversation, we start talking about the same things. When I start talking about manufacturing and the safety of manufacturing of edible products or concentrates, many times I get, well, it's not safe. Houses are blowing up. Well, that's the conversation we want to have, because the houses that are blowing up are situations that come up from a completely illegal activity. That is not something that happens in the legal environment. The legal environment in Colorado and Washington. In Colorado, in the 7 years, they have about 320 licensed manufacturing locations, and in 7 years of 320 licensed manufacturing locations, there was never one explosion or injury as a result of an extraction process in a licensed facility. And although I don't know the numbers for Washington, we have consulted and worked with people in Washington, and there too, there have not been a single reported explosion in the many years that they have licensed. So these are the conversations that we want to make sure that we educate and have that conversation up front. Then we want to collaborate. That's fine. So if the decision is, and again, the city has not made a decision, that's the reason for all these workshops. But if the decision was to move forward with legislation, then when we start to create legislation, we've done so with the input from all of our stakeholders. And just a little example, in 2017 in Colorado, the legislative body, General Assembly, received 44 bills that had something to do with marijuana. Those 44 bills, of those 22 passed. Those 22 bills changed 124 different laws and rules. That's disastrous for a new industry. It's disastrous for the industry itself, because in that particular situation, the primary rules that were being addressed was packaging and labeling. Could you imagine if you've spent $500,000 on packaging and labeling and equipment to get all the printing done, and you change the rules on them, and now they have to scrap all of that and start over? That's very costly, and it becomes very difficult for an industry to be able to remain compliant. And that's just one example. There were many examples of constantly changing rules. On the flip side, yes, sir. Did you have a comment?
Well, I know that something happened in California on July 1st on a lot of these dispensaries. Something changed. They couldn't sell certain products, et cetera. Is this like sort of what you're talking about?
Sure. Well, so in the Colorado example, that example was an established industry that had permanent rules that industry was working under, and they've changed them just through the legislative body. In California, we have a set of emergency rules, and it's an evolving process. They don't have the permanent rules fully established yet, although they just recently published. And those rules, in allowing the industry to get up and running, legal marijuana doesn't miraculously appear in stores. We have marijuana in the state, and something, it had to be addressed. So there were some concessions designed in the law that allowed the inventory that was on the shelf to be, as long as it was packaged and labeled, safely and appropriately, was allowed to continue to sell until a certain date. And that date has recently come and passed. And what ends up happening is now we start to move forward for an increased accountability for the inventory and tracking of the inventory and where it came from. Yes, ma'am.
I recently went to Oregon, and it was very easy to get my CBD for my medical marijuana. And they have a tax of 13%. Starting January 1st, we have a tax of 25%, which for me, being on a fixed income, is a lot. I want to know, once we get through this process, is our state tax going to drop? 25% is outrageous.
So the state tax is where it's at, and it's not designed to drop. There was a bill to try to reduce the tax rate, and that bill was not successful. So right now, no, there is not. There's always an opportunity for it. Someone could offer up another bill. But right now, that attempt to reduce it was not successful.
Well,
And at the end of this, we will talk about tax rates both at a local and a state.
because I just want to say in Oregon, anybody can walk into any shop. You don't have to have a cannabis license. And you can get quality cannabis and good CBD. Now, where I used to go to have my deliveries, there is no CBD products to be had, to be delivered. And I don't know what's going on with the manufacturing. But CBD is, I can go 50 miles to get my CBD. And I can get it by mail, but I can't get it from my Novato or my San Rafael registry anymore.
Sure. So the education collaboration goes into legislation, and I use the example. So the goal is, and some of the reasons why the constant legislative change in Colorado particularly was because the stakeholders didn't come to the table. All of the right people didn't sit down and have conversations, and it wasn't done right or completely doable at the very beginning. And what ends up happening is some of the rules weren't transparent, they weren't enforceable, they created more problems than they were intended to. So when collaboration is done appropriately, legislation is kind of created more seamlessly. When that happens, the regulation component of this becomes much easier, less cost burden for the local government and state government. And what we want to be able to do is, as we've educated and collaborated and we've created rules, that regulation, the local governments need to build a really good, strong relationship with the businesses. And we want to be able to government, through regulation and legislation, put businesses on a clear path to success to make sure that they know what is expected of them, they know what they are to achieve, and that path is smooth. And if there's problems, it's clearly defined in legislation, and it's clearly enforced and reinforced through regulation. Go ahead. So a real brief overview. We're going to just very briefly talk about state and local legislation, an overview about the various cannabis businesses, benefit of regulation. We will touch very briefly on personal cultivation, and then we will open it again for questions. So an overview of state and local. Without spending an astronomical amount of time, 1996, California started to address some type of regulations regarding medical marijuana. But during that time between 96 and 2005, very little was done or initiated to regulate the industry and make sure that it's held accountable. And of course, during that time, other states in 2010, 2011, Colorado and Washington, and then Oregon and Arizona and Alaska have started to create both regulated medical models and regulated adult use or recreational models. And when it finally got around to 2005, the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act was passed, and then shortly after that, Proposition 64. All this is designed to do, and the slide is, all I want to convey is that there have been many bills and there has been a lot of work to try to get medical, and then through Proposition 64, adult use, legal and regulated, and create a set of rules that, again, clearly puts the industry on a path to success and allows local government to have some control over it. So In both of these, in 2017, there was a trailer bill, Senate Bill 94, and what that was designed to do is, in 2015, 2016, there were bills that were offered, and those bills, in many situations, conflicted or didn't complement one another. So what ended up happening is the trailer bill was designed to clean up the regulatory oversight of medicinal and adult use. And then again, the Assembly Bill 133 was also offered and passed to help redefine some kind of ambiguous gray areas in the legislation. But with that said, all of those bills did something really important, and it created a state-regulated body. And a state-regulated body is the Bureau of Cannabis Control, regulates a few of the licenses. The Department of Food and Ag regulates the cultivation, and the Department of Public Health regulates businesses. And those regulatory bodies are responsible for really creating the broad-reaching umbrella of regulatory oversight and creating the rules and the licensing requirements. And then what the laws did is allow dual licensing. And dual licensing is very important. And what it does is it allows local government to have a say in what occurs in their jurisdiction. And not only say, but you can go. But really, it was designed to allow local government to have control over time, place, and manner. And I will say that periodically through the talk, but time, place, and manner becomes extremely important, because what is suitable for downtown Oakland or downtown San Francisco is probably not suitable for Novato or any other area. So what we want to be able to do is, in local control, we want to think about and ask questions on this time, place, and manner. Time, kind of self-evident, but not only hours of operation, but timing. When do we do it now, or do we do it later? Place, that has a lot to do with zoning, and many of the problems that were apparent in Colorado was the conflict between the newly established businesses in the immediate neighborhoods that they came in, because really zoning wasn't considered, and that place component wasn't taken in consideration, which caused more problems than it should have. And then manner. Manner is absolutely important. Manner is the way the business looks and the way the business operates, and how it's held accountable. And that manner really dictates how that business interacts with the community. So when local government starts to ask questions, and they come to HDL and they say, we need to start asking some questions. They ask the same questions. Do we have a marijuana industry or a cannabis industry? And the question is, you can have, through that dual licensing, you can have none. You can have a complete ban and enforce that. You could have medicinal, you could have adult use, or you could have both. And that's really one of the first questions. Then the next question is, okay, we've answered that question, we've decided to do something. What types of licenses do we want? What types of commercial activity? And I'll explain those in a minute. But we have to ask ourselves, do we want retail? Do we want cultivation? Do we want manufacturing, micro-business, distribution, testing? We have to make a decision on what type. After that, the next question is, where do we put that? And oftentimes where we put that is somewhat of a complicated question, because there are a variety of different impacts for the different businesses that we have, and we want to make sure that it is very thoughtful in the zoning requirements for the various licenses. And once we do the where do we put it, sometimes that dictates the number of licenses that we allow. So do we have adult use, or do we have a ban or no? Do we have adult use, medical, or both? What types of license activities do we have? Where do we put them? And then the question is, how many do we license? What is an acceptable number? Sometimes that question becomes before zoning. In larger jurisdictions, you could set a number and then worry about zoning. In smaller jurisdictions, zoning becomes more important because you are really limited on the appropriate zoned area, or maybe the number of commercial properties within those zoned areas. So those two questions can be intertwined, but the number, it has to be decided upon, and that's a conversation that had to be had. And then once we've decided on the size of the industry and where to put it, then the question is, what's it going to cost us, and how do we tax it? And that's really where HDL came in to do a cost analysis and cost recovery fit gap studies to help. Yes, ma'am.
So would there be a local tax plus a state tax?
There is. And at the end of this, unfortunately, is when the question, really my presentation is in that order, but the tax question is at the end, and the tax question is, there is a state tax, there is a local tax, and the local tax, there is great conversations in what types of businesses and how do we tax it, and at what rate we tax it, so we can make a determination of where that local tax falls in line with the state tax. And then the state tax, the tax is different than the cost recovery and fee analysis that gets done to make sure that local government, it can be made whole through the regulatory oversight through a cost recovery component of the licensing process, the renewal process. And I will talk about that. Go ahead.
There's a large component of county tax also, right? 15%?
Yeah, yes, there's.
Question, please.
So there's a variety. There are state tax and state sales tax, there's state excise tax, there's a county tax, and then there's local sales tax and local excise tax. And I will show you all the variety of taxes. We can talk about taxes, and I will conclude the conversation with a chart with all the various taxes. So the question is, what types of industries do we have and what are available? Cultivation. Cultivation has indoor, has outdoor, and mixed light license types that can be licensed. And a local government could allow all those or have a conversation and decide to have one or all. Microbusiness. A microbusiness is a business model that a business owner has a minimum of 3 of these. The only thing that they could not have is testing labs. An owner of a testing lab cannot have financial interests or operate any of the other locations. So a microbusiness, you could have in a microbusiness cultivation, manufacturing, and retail sales. You could have retail sales and manufacturing and distribution. You could have any of the combination, but you have to have a minimum of 3 of those activities. And that it was really designed for a smaller component of the industry, so smaller business operators have control of the entire supply chain. And there are some kind of unique in that aspects of microbusiness that the cultivation has to be a smaller cultivation. It's got to be under 10,000 square feet. And if you choose to have a manufacturing component of a microbusiness, it has to be non-volatile solvent. So then manufacturing. Yes, ma'am.
Can you just go over what your last sentence was with?
Can you just go over what your last sentence was about cultivation? Something about so many square feet?
So at the beginning of this, microbusiness is designed to have a smaller scale model. So a single business owner has control of the supply chain. And in the design, in the legislation, if you own a micro business, your cultivation has to be below 10,000 square feet. And then it also has to, if you choose manufacturing, it has to be done in a process that does not include volatile solvents. It has to be a non-volatile solvent process. Which leads into manufacturing. Manufacturing is a process of both extraction of the concentrated oils from the plant material to make a crude, and then you can do anything you choose to do with that crude. You can make some concentrates. You can infuse the concentrates into salves and sublinguals and topicals and edible products. And really, the sky's the limit with regards to manufacturing. Testing labs is a license that is going to be responsible for taking all of the inventory, all of the supply chain inventory, and making sure that it is tested for the appropriate levels or no levels if warranted for heavy metals and contaminants and molds and mildews and the potency and homogeneity of products and things like that. There is a laundry list, and I'm not going to go over it, but you can go to the state websites, which I strongly encourage you to do, to look at all of the different testing requirements that a product has to have before it reaches a retail or a customer. And those tests are then, the test results are then reported back to the distributor, and the product is packaged with the report of how it passed. If it didn't pass, it would be quarantined and held for product recall, and there's a variety of different steps that are involved in that. Retailers, there is conventional retail, which would have adult use and medical, and you could, that's a storefront. That is the conventional storefront retail model. The non-storefront retailer is designed to allow sales of cannabis to customers, and the purchase is not made at a retail store. It's made online or a phone order, and it is then delivered. All of the inventory is then delivered. I do want to make a distinction between delivery and distribution. That's really important. A distribution facility and license is a legal license operator that distributes inventory from one legal license location to another legal license location. That distribution, the transfer of the inventory has to go through a distributor. So from cultivation, it gets handed to a distributor. The distributor makes sure that the taxes and the packaging, the labeling, and product quality assurance is all taken care of. Then the distributor makes sure that when it's all done and packaged and it's ready to go, the distributor takes it off, whether it goes to manufacturing or retail, and they're the ones that transfer it back and forth. You had a question?
Would the preparation of food products fall under manufacturing?
Yes, it does. So that is distribution. So delivery is the transfer of product or inventory to a consumer or a customer or a patient. So that delivery component can be done or has to be done through a licensed operator, and that could be done through a retailer or a non-storefront retailer. The non-storefront retailer solely is responsible for delivering it. Now recently, there was a law that allowed local government to prohibit deliveries from taking place in your jurisdiction. So if Novato decided that they didn't want deliveries, they could pass an ordinance to prohibit that. The most recent rules that came out for the proposed permanent rules from the Bureau of Cannabis Control now took that control out of local government, and you cannot prohibit delivery in the jurisdiction. So then the question comes back, it's legal in the state, and now retailers or non-storefront retailers can deliver it in your jurisdiction at any given time. So the question would, yes ma'am.
Is that only
Anywhere.
medical?
No, both.
Medical and
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm not going to do that.
I have a question. You mentioned that there were 2 Novato delivery retailers.
I didn't. Michael did. And
Michael, do you want to disclose those?
Sure, there are no deliveries, so the current ordinance prohibits any additional facilities. So rather, it's 2 testing labs. So there's no approved delivery or retail establishments or distribution, only testing facilities. Those were existing facilities that were grandfathered in.
And they're now in Novato.
Actually, the ordinance, I believe, does allow delivery of medical marijuana.
Correct, but, right, so the question was, are they licensed? We don't have any licensed ones, so to be clear, so the ordinance allows delivery of medical marijuana, but the city is not regulating that delivery activity. So it just allows it through the ordinance process for delivery of medical marijuana only. So if you're a medical patient, then, if you go through whatever delivery service you have, the city is not prohibiting that.
And it's for businesses that are not located in Novato. So outside businesses can
Correct.
deliver medical marijuana.
So there are no licensed distribution facilities in Novato. There's no licensed retailers in Novato.
But there's 2 testing.
Two existing testing facilities that were here prior to the ordinance being established.
So did that change as of July 1st? Is that one of the things?
Yeah.
Because I have not been able to find the delivery. So I'm sorry. Did the rule about deliveries being accessible for medical marijuana patients, did that recently change? Because I have found it very, very difficult to find anybody that would deliver to me in Nevada.
so the rule that changed was the local government has to allow it. That doesn't necessarily change who delivered it. The problem with the accessibility to deliveries was there was a variety of companies, but there is a very prominent company on the internet that was willing to deliver a product to you. Well, it is against the law. If you are not one of these people and you have a local and state license to deliver. So the accessibility to deliveries will start to dramatically reduce until local government starts to license and make available legal outlets for that delivery to occur.
So there isn't much available at this point.
That's right.
Reach out to retailers that have delivery.
That question.
Neighboring cities will deliver locally,
Oh, okay.
and they have. So you can reach out to local retailers like storefronts. Some of them do deliveries, and a lot of them will deliver here. I know some in Santa Rosa will. I know some in Vallejo will. Maybe some in San Francisco too.
So the answer is there are people in this room that can make sure that you get what you need. Go ahead.
So one of the other businesses I didn't see up there described is, I don't know, on-premise use, similar to like these brew pubs that allow it. We're seeing them in Sonoma County. Would that just come under retail?
That comes over local control. That is,
It
yeah. The only one that I did not include was special events, which is a license that the state will issue. But the on-site consumption, that is a local controlled decision. So just a little bit of what's going on here. San Rafael has up to 8 licenses, and Colfax currently has 1 dispensary. Is the representative from Colfax here? She was here. I'm sorry. I'm dealing with Colfax and another. Yes, Fairfax. I greatly apologize. Pardon me?
Fairfax, I think, is medical.
Medical only?
Yes, that's correct.
100% medical only.
Okay.
But they do require a state card.
No,
Yeah, they require a state card.
In Fairfax?
Fairfax requires a state card as well, because it's the arrangement they made with Fairfax.
Yeah.
Is that new?
And that's part of that local control decision.
Well, Nevada requires a state card.
Well, there's no Novato right now.
Well, when I order, it must be from another place.
Yes.
So
We could take all that
a
offline.
recommendation is a little bit different than a state card.
Oh,
So yeah, the recommendation is the recommendation that is given that allows you to make the purchase for medical. The state card is a very specific document that allows you to be exempt from the medical tax. You have to have, I'm sorry, the excise tax. Yes, ma'am?
The state tax,
No, the excise tax.
which is part of the state tax?
Yes.
yes.
Is it the 15% sales tax? I thought it was the sales tax. You still charge them the excise tax.
Correct. So again, first off, and let me make it very clear, there's absolutely no intention to cover all the ground that needs to be addressed in one meeting. The goal for this is to kind of set the groundwork for that general education. Dave McPherson, our tax guru who came from San Jose and Oakland and who's been dealing with this for in excess of 11 years, is going to be doing a workshop just like this, just on finance, just on tax, just on fees and cost recovery and tax issues. So there will be an opportunity for us to drill down into every one of these, but the sole purpose of this, and we're running slightly behind in that, all we want to do is open up the conversation, create the foundation, create that common understanding of what we're talking about. So the city...
This one's not currently scheduled.
Well, it is scheduled. I don't know if it's posted.
Repeat the question.
It says recap of 1 and 2.
Yeah, we're gonna go, so on the third meeting.
And please use the microphone.
On the third meeting, we're going to go ahead and kind of cover everything that really hasn't been covered yet, and finance is going to be one of those things. We'll go ahead and change the description on the website so that it properly adds that in there. But we'll be covering tax and finance and all that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to race through these somewhat so we can still engage, but I want to talk about what we expect, and this is really where that time, place, and manner falls into making sure that when I started 7 years ago in Colorado, the first licensed locations looked like the places that you probably imagined downtown metropolitan area that were not very sightly, that were not very welcoming, that didn't feel safe. They didn't create an inviting location for patients and customers, and that really was a really bad inflection of the industry, and it was a bad reflection of what the community standards were. So when I talk about time, place, and manner, and local government working with the industry to create an industry that reflects, what we start to do is the retail sales locations become a reflection of the immediate community that they're in, and they are safe, they are inviting, within these they have multiple layers of security, minimum security and enhanced security requirements to ensure the safety of the inventory, the cash, and the people on site. Go on to the next. Cultivation facilities. In order to be successful in this industry, you have to have a very clean, very well run, very well thought out, very well engineered cultivation facility to make sure that you can maximize your production and you are profitable. If you go on to the next slide. You cannot make money, and it is impossible to have operations like this. And oftentimes, when we start to talk about licensed businesses, and generally the community, because they're not directly involved in the industry, start to imagine this. And this is what you see. This is what you see on the news. This is what you see when the police departments are going to do raids. And this is exactly why regulatory oversight is so important. We make sure that the unsafe electrical and humidity levels and all of these problems that you see, this is an absolute disaster. And no way is this anywhere close to representing what the industry is. It very much so the previous slide. So part of a robust regulatory system is the accountability of the inventory. And I just show this right now, and in the most recent change, there's really not going to be a division. Cannabis. Cannabis is cannabis, and cannabis doesn't know whether it's medical or retail. We are making those decisions. So in Colorado, and these were tags from Colorado because California hasn't completely established theirs, but we were able to identify which plants were dedicated to what industry, so the supply chain, we could follow it from seed to sale through the inventory tracking information. The only reason why I show you this is there are multiple layers of information within this. There's a radio identifying frequency chip inside that, and that can be scanned by the basic RFID gun like you have at Target or Costco or Walmart, and you can scan that number, and you can even set it to where it tells you where that tag is in the room. But the important thing is that the variety of different layers of information allows the inventory to be followed through digitally from the beginning of the plant to the purchase to the customer, and that becomes very important for data in the industry. It becomes important for the operator so they know where inventory is in the supply chain. And it also becomes a very important component for public safety and health. So we can, if there's a product recall, we could go back and follow those numbers to figure out where the product went, if in fact there was a problem or a complaint or a test that needs to be addressed. Go on to the next slide. So manufacturing is often one of the other than cultivation and odor, when we're talking about community impacts, manufacturing is one of the other most frequently discussed topics. And what I wanted to show in this slide is the things on the left. This is called open blasting, or BHO, butane hash oil production that is done through an open loop. This is completely illegal. It has nothing to do with the industry, but this is what is blowing up houses and garages. And this has nothing to do with a licensed regulated industry. This on the right side, these are commercially engineered, industrial hygienists inspected, trained products that are not just designed for cultivation. These were designed decades ago to do extractions of essential oils and to take caffeine out of tea and coffee. So these systems are closed loop systems where gas goes inside the system and stays in the system and is recycled through the system, so there's no gas out in the ambient air, very much like here where so in this very brief training, you put plant material in this at the very top, which I'm not tall enough, but you have a canister of butane. You shoot the gas or the liquid through the canister. That strips the oils off the plant material, and then the residual is deposited here. Well, the problem is, if you go to the next slide, which is not there, go back, is in this liquid is the oils, but is also a gas, and that gas has to burn off. And butane is a very heavy gas. It expands 170 to 1, so one canister, once you open it up, it expands out 170 times. And because it's very heavy, it goes to the lowest level, and then it ultimately seeks out a source of ignition, and that's where they end up blowing up. So these were designed well before the industry, but resolve that and fix that problem and have nothing to do with licensed industry. If you go on. The extraction facilities are designed now that they're commercial kitchens, and they, yes ma'am?
Is it true that BHOs are no longer legal in California?
BHOs, butane
hash oil
extracts.
So they're Sure. The butane hash oil is just a description, but it's really an improper use of the description of the illegal process. This is open blasting, but they called this BHO.
Okay, is there a BHO process that is still legal in the state of
Yes.
California?
So
Yes, thank
this
you.
process allows gas to go through using butane that it strips. Same process, different method. Okay. So this was just a reflective of manufacturing facility. It is very clean. It's commercially designed. If you go on to the next, they're very representative of commercial kitchens. They're designed with safety. This is the cooking or production side. You would still have the extraction equipment, which I just showed you in the previous slide, where the oils are extracted. That's all combined under one roof. And the interesting thing about manufacturing is manufacturing really is required to hire the broadest range of skills and staff. You have extractors that do the extraction. You have confectionaires that make chocolates. You have product and labeling. You have marketing people. So a manufacturing facility really creates the broadest range of jobs and skills if you were to think about it that way. Go on to the next one. So this is what I was talking about. This is what open blasting or illegal processes do. And just as a very brief description, this process here deposits the crude oil in that Pyrex pan, and that bubbling is the gas being released. It's a very violent process. Well, these smart individuals decided to put a gas burn-off process right next to two heat sources, which wasn't real bright, and they were fortunate not to have blown themselves off. And in this situation here, local law enforcement was called because they put the pan right next to the hot plate, and that wasn't real smart. So and also too, extraction processes. This is done, and that's a lot of canisters. This was done, obviously, as you can see, up in the mountains, out in the open, and manufacturing facilities have to be done within a licensed premise that meet all the state requirements for both health and safety. Distribution kind of takes up nondescript buildings. There's really no advertising need for it. That building would have minimum and robust security requirements. The inventory is brought in from licensed cultivators and manufacturers, and that is where the distributor makes sure that the tax is paid and the quality assurance and the testing is all done and documented appropriately before it goes out to a retailer, and then it's transported in nondescript vehicles that are secured and have GPS on them. And yes, ma'am.
At which stage is the testing done?
The testing is done before it gets to a retailer. So inventory comes from the cultivator, and depending on, and you know, we used to have a license or a slide for this, but when it gets to the manufacturer, the testing has to be done at a couple different layers, depending on what happens to it. If it's just bud, when it gets to the distributor, it gets tested in the bud, the smokable form, and when the test results come back, it goes directly out to the retailer. If it gets to the manufacturer, depending on what is done with that product, it's, you know, it could be tested a couple different times during that process from the manufacturer.
But right now, the distributor owns testing. Like, that's the person that's, oh, sorry.
Yeah, right now, at the end of it all, the distributor is the one that owns testing, and they're responsible for making sure that it's been tested before it goes to retail.
So yeah, it has to come from a distributor, so at that point, but there are a variety of different reasons why it would end up being sent off to the manufacturer. Yes, sir.
I just have a question. The marijuana is getting tested for certain things, how can I make sure as a purchaser, a medical marijuana purchaser, that these things contain everything I want to be tested for?
Well, the test results will be available to you, and you will be able to see the breakdown of everything that's on what site? On the laboratory's test site, but it should be on the packaging, but it should be, each retailer should have a process to post that, and maybe an industry. Yes, sir.
So what you should do is you'll look at the Bureaus of Cannabis Control. They're the state agency that licenses testing laboratories, and they will tell you everything that's going to be tested for. So there's 30, 40, 50 different things. So that's not going to be on a product label, but you will know if it's on the shelf at the retailer that it's passed those things, because it has to. So.
And oftentimes the retailer will have a report from the specific laboratory that they have for the breakdown of that product.
A lot of times the products are coming with QR codes. So a lot of times the products are coming with QR codes, a lot of the flour.
QR.
It's that little box.
That black and white
And then
design.
when you scan it with your phone, it'll bring up the test results and the whole lot.
And actually, at the end of the meeting, I'll actually show you guys how to use that QR code, which will help you obviously in the future if you ever want to scan those things.
There's a question there.
I think too, it's finding a retailer that has specific standards, because every retailer will accept different quality of product. So I think it would be getting to know which retailer has your kind of ethos and beliefs. And we have a dispensary in Sonoma County, and we keep files of all of our certificate of analysis. So if anyone was ever curious, it's not required, to go on the label, but if someone came in and said, I'm curious about this product, it's an easy piece of paperwork to pull and share with someone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I was wondering if the amount of THC and CBDs are going to be required to be on the label?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So testing facilities, this is just representative of one, but they're clean, certified, very well ran, has laboratory technicians that have gone to school and are doing it. It's just not someone that has decided to buy the equipment and start up a license. Go on to the next.
I've got a question. Testing and distribution cannot be part of the micro business, correct?
Testing.
Only testing. Just testing, but I can be a distributor.
Yes.
And a manufacturer and a cultivator.
Yes. So when we are having a conversation about the license industry and you go back to that local control, we want to make sure that the operators that are operating are appropriate and suitable and are to some level of qualification to make sure that that relationship that the city builds with the industry is good. In many times, the safety plan is part of a well-designed, merit-based application process that allows the city to see what, in this situation, is the fire suppression system. This is another example of fire suppression system where a safety plan is offered up and, is designed by a third-party consultant, fire suppression consultant, and there will be minimum both state and local requirements to ensure that both safety and security, go ahead and change that, safety and security plans meet both the state requirements and state and local requirement and expectations. So in security, there are minimum requirements. And the minimum requirements is that all licensed facilities have to have cameras. Cameras have to cover all places within the limited access area to make sure that all cash handling and money and individuals that are interacting around the inventory are watched and accounted for. There are requirements for, in the plan would be the level of security and access, or visitor and individual control throughout the building, cash handling procedures. And so all of these components of a plan are put together and offered up and reviewed and approved by the local government.
Local.
Well, both state and local. There is a state standard, and then what ends up happening is local government can increase that by requiring additional cameras, or an example that we've used is in a retail location, the state just says the inventory has to remain in a limited access area. A local government could say all inventory in a retail area, or in the bud room or the display, has to be locked up completely in a safe overnight. That would be an increased security requirement that is required at a local level. And local government has control over that. Yes, there was a question?
For the monitors, who's on the other end monitoring it? Is it the Novato Police Station, or is it a state facility?
No, so every business will contract with a security provider. There are going to be minimum requirements for that licensed business to create a security package through a security company or provider that installs and monitors. So there's on-site security, physical, guard security, and then there's video monitoring, and then that is done through a third-party contractor. And then there is also an alarm system, the burglary and fire alarm system, which sometimes is the same as the video surveillance company, or sometimes it's different, like ADT or another company that does that. So there are a variety of different security levels. So with that said, there are ways, and can be written in local requirement, that allows local police to be able to access the IP information through this system, and that's really a kind of a one-to-one conversation that the local police department has with the businesses, and that information is not readily shared amongst the general public. Did you have a comment? No? Okay. Go on. Thank you. One of the other issues that we talk about, so generally public health, public safety, zoning impacts, and environmental concerns are the most common issues that are discussed. And with regards to odor mitigation is certainly a conversation that is had, particularly around cultivation facilities, which really has the most impact on odor and surrounding neighborhoods, then manufacturing, then distribution and retail really has such a little impact, because everything that by the time it gets to the licensed retailer, it's already packaged, and there's next to no odor. So odor mitigation at a cultivation level, at the very beginning in Colorado, there was no thought, and that's one of those conversations that we didn't know we were supposed to have. And at a local level, at a state level, we didn't even consider the impact. And what has happened over time is the industry has really taken it upon themselves to be very, very good stewards with regards to the environmental impact, and has come up with some incredibly well-designed carbon filter systems and air scrubbing systems and multi-layer negative air systems that make sure that the odor from the cultivation facility that is ultimately released into the ambient air and accessible to the immediate neighborhood is greatly reduced. And there are a variety of different ways that local and state government can make sure that it is done appropriately. But this is just an example. I like to show this in that the cultivation occurs in these rooms, and there's multiple rooms in there, and as you can see, the pipes go up. So what ends up happening is during the harvest when the odor is the strongest. The odor goes through those pipes and goes through several layers of carbon filters, and then it goes through an air scrubber system and ends up in the ambient air where the hallway is, and then that goes through yet another system. And in this particular location, they have like a kind of like a smokestack, and the smokestack then puts the odor or the air up a little higher, that once it gets up there, then it hits the airstream and allows it to spread out and dissipate a little faster and easier than, you know, going out the door to the immediate neighborhood. But you know, another component about odor mitigation is zoning and making sure that these types of businesses are placed in the appropriate locations instead of right next to something that you don't want it next to. And that goes into the impacts of, or the conversation about place. And place will start to really have a conversation about the sensitive use areas. So I really like to show this because this was the absolute disaster that we had at the very beginning that we didn't, when I say we, Colorado regulators and legislators didn't know that we needed. When we were talking about a cannabis industry, a regulated industry, we really had absolutely no idea what the manufacturing entailed. We didn't understand the extraction processes, we didn't understand the language, the equipment, and then because of that, we also didn't realize what was going to be produced. And the industry was very creative and at best. And on this side, these are, in this particular picture, these were infused products, and these products here were not infused products. They were commercial products bought on shelves. And now, all of this, I show this to you to show that these are clearly illegal products. Part of that rule change that I used the example of was really defining what can be made. And now Colorado has done it, all the states have done it. California will probably do it tenfold because they have multiple layers of legislation. But products cannot be made that are enticing to children. They cannot be made in shapes that are enticing to children, colors that are enticing to children, in packaging that are reflective of cartoons or stars or fishes or anything that is somewhat representative of a child candy or a child product. It cannot occur. You cannot package or name or market any product similar to any mainstream product like the Pop-Tarts and the Keef Cats and the Twixt and all of that. So this was a very real concern, public safety and public health concern at the very beginning, and now, not so much. I mean, it is a concern, but the concern has been addressed in that they can't make these anymore. If you go on to the next, the rules will be designed so that products are not representative of anything like that. And then this is just an example of a product, but it was a conversation about enhanced product safety. And that was another lesson that we learned that we didn't know anything about. When at the very beginning, the industry, not the industry, but beginning of the industry, product was put in a paper sack and was stapled or folded over, and it was given, and that's how it went out. And if they had gummies, they reached in, they put some gummies in a plastic bag, they zip-locked it, and they walked out. And that doesn't occur anymore. The products are going to be placed. So ASTM certification is a certification that, for lack of better definition, they take a product, they give it to a group of kids, they look at it, and if it takes a substantial amount of time for children at a certain age to try to figure it out or get into it, that's kind of how they figure out the various standards. And it's You can go online to ASTM, it goes over all this, but the takeaway is that there are products now, and the industry is designed through regulatory oversight that the inventory is placed in packaging and then is placed in exit packaging, and the exit packaging is opaque, you can't see in it, it's substantially hard to get into, it is resealable, and it is a safe product container to make sure that we don't have inventory getting in the hands of children, as long as it's in the appropriate packaging. If the user, customer, patient does not, then it becomes problematic, and that's where education, both on the industry side and community and government side, is very important to make sure that as new users and patients and customers are purchasing these items, that communication and education is repeatedly done to make sure that there is ultimate responsibility by the user to lock up and keep the product safe. One of the other things in the 124 rules that changed is we created a universal symbol. This is California's, each state has their own, but we wanted to be able to help people identify that the inventory that you have laying around is infused. These were examples. We had a company come in Colorado, and many years ago, and with vegetable dye, they did silk screening, basically a silk screening process to place our state symbol on a variety of different types. And as you can imagine, when you're creating rules for packaging and labeling of products, it becomes very daunting because there's a variety of different forms products come in. Liquids, bulk products, they come in small size or large size, they come bagged. There's a ton of different ways. So to create a set of rules is very complicated, and I can tell you in Washington and in Colorado that the packaging and labeling requirements is the most complicated, robust, detailed process of all of the rulemaking items. So personal cultivation. We have been talking about the licensed industry. The licensed industry is what is regulated by the Bureau of Cannabis Control and Department of Food and Ag and Department of Health. In the state legislation, the state legislators entitled every person in the state to have personal cultivation of up to 6 plants. And that personal cultivation, that cultivation that occurs at a house, is not what we have been talking about. You have the right, the city has the right, everyone in the city has the right to do that. The city does not have a right to prohibit that personal cultivation in a house. They do have a right to prohibit cultivation that occurs outside a house, but they cannot prohibit your right to exercise your right to personal cultivation of 6 plants within your house. Now, with that said, the legislators said that a local government may regulate within reason, and the next question is, what does that mean? And my answer is, I don't know. It's not been tested. Can the city government dictate what rooms that it occurs in? I don't know. Can they dictate how it's spread out? So the goal is, if you think about it, and we were talking about creating legislation, we want to create a safe environment for our children and the people and the neighbors around us. So creating some type of ordinance or rule to address personal cultivation should be done. And it should be something that every city addresses, and should be an ongoing conversation. But this conversation is completely separate from what we've been talking about. And the biggest takeaway is that when we're talking about the license industry, we are not talking about someone's right to cultivate inside their house. There's a question back here, and then I'll get you.
So it sounds like we created a catch-all just in case, let's say there's a situation, there's 7 people living in a house, so now they're growing a ton of plants.
No. It's 6 plants per residence.
Per residence, not per resident.
Correct, I'm sorry.
Well, that was one of my questions. And what if I were to put like a greenhouse outside, would that count as being legally growing plants indoors?
So
or
you're,
does it have to be inside?
you're
the
allowed to
house?
have it in an auxiliary structure.
That's okay too?
But again, I hazard to have a conversation about the personal cultivation because there are a variety of different things, and that's something that the local government would have to kind of vet out.
I guess I'm asking what's legal in Nevada right now.
Nothing.
So
Well-
now I cannot legally grow.
Yes, you have a state right. You have 6 plants in your house.
Okay, and a greenhouse can count as being indoor.
It should,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
There, you know, again, that's a very broad question, but generally, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to mention that the 2 ordinances that regulate the City of Novato right now are available on the city's website.
Great, that needs to be.
Okay, Amy, please.
I did just want to let everybody know that the 2 ordinances that currently affect the City of Novato are available on the city's website. The city did create a cannabis regulations page on the City of Novato's website, and both of those ordinances are available there if you wanted to read them.
And the city's website is?
It's www.novato.org, and it's /cannabis. And it's at the bottom of the white card that hopefully everybody picked up at the table. So if you look at the bottom of that white little card, business card, you'll see the address, the website.
Sorry, the card is simply for submitting up questions and everything, so that link actually is to it. However, on the document that actually lists out all of our workshops, on the bottom of that, it actually does have the website, and that is novato.org/cannabis.
So just, yes, sir.
Well, I read the city ordinances,